He lay in the grimy alleyway, pressed against the cold, damp brick wall, trying to make himself disappear into the shadows and the stench of overflowing dumpsters. Rain, a miserable, persistent drizzle, plastered his thin, matted fur to his skeletal frame, offering no relief, only deepening the chill that had settled deep in his bones. He was dying, not slowly fading, but actively, imminently dying, right there on the unforgiving pavement of the city streets. His breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper, each inhale a monumental effort, each exhale a sigh that seemed to carry the last vestiges of his life force away. His eyes, sunken and clouded with pain and exhaustion, were barely open, reflecting nothing of the harsh urban landscape around him. He had simply collapsed here, his body finally succumbing to starvation, dehydration, disease, and the crushing weight of utter hopelessness. He was invisible, just another piece of urban decay, ignored by the hurried footsteps echoing nearby, destined to become another nameless casualty of the indifferent streets. Life on the streets had been a brutal existence. Once, perhaps, he'd known a different life, a hint of shepherd. Mix in his ancestry suggested a potential for loyalty and companionship. But that past was a dim, forgotten memory, erased by the harsh realities of survival. Scavenging for scraps, dodging traffic, enduring the cruelty of some humans and the complete indifference of most, battling illness without reprieve, it had taken its toll. He carried the marks of his struggle, scars on his muzzle, a limp from an old, untreated injury, ribs starkly visible beneath his ravaged coat, skin stretched taut over protruding hip bones. Now the fight was over. He had no energy left to search for food or water, no strength to seek shelter from the chilling rain. He had simply lain down in this forgotten alley to let the darkness claim him. He was dying, alone and unnoticed. That's when Sarah turned down the alley. Sarah was, by all definitions, an ordinary person. She worked a demanding but unremarkable office job, lived in a small apartment nearby, navigated the city with the usual mix of purpose and weary routine. She wasn't an animal rescuer, didn't volunteer at shelters, didn't have any special training. She was just trying to take a shortcut home after a long day, hoping to avoid the main street crowds. She almost didn't see him. He blended so perfectly with the grime and shadows, a pathetic heap easily mistaken for a pile of wet rags or discarded trash. But something, a flicker of movement, too rhythmic for inanimate debris, perhaps, or just a subconscious prompting, made her pause. She squinted into the gloom, her eyes adjusting, and then she saw him, really saw him. The skeletal form, the labored breathing, the utter stillness that screamed, not of sleep, but of imminent death. Her breath caught in her throat. A wave of shock, revulsion, and overwhelming sadness washed over her. Her first instinct, born of the city dwellers' learned defense mechanism, was to look away, to hurry past, to pretend she hadn't seen. It was too much, too awful. Someone else would handle it. Animal control, a rescue group. Surely someone dealt with things like this. She took a step, then hesitated. The image of the dog, so utterly helpless, so clearly suffering, wouldn't leave her mind. She looked back. He hadn't moved. He was still breathing, just barely. What if no one else comes? The thought struck her with sudden, piercing clarity. What if I'm the only one who sees him? What if I walk away and he dies here, alone, because I chose not to act? She wasn't a hero, wasn't equipped for this. She was just Sarah, tired, wanting to get home. But in that moment, faced with the stark reality of a life hanging by the thinnest thread, her ordinary status felt like a flimsy excuse. Could she live with herself if she did nothing? The answer was no. Heart pounding, unsure of what to even do, Sarah cautiously approached. "Hey," she whispered softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Hey there, boy, are you okay?" The dog didn't react, didn't even seem to register her presence. His eyes remained half-closed, vacant. She could see now how truly emaciated he was, the sores on his bony hips, the way his fur clung wetly to his shivering frame. He was definitely dying. Fear mingled with determination. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsy with adrenaline. Who did she even call? 911 seemed wrong. She Googled Animal Rescue Emergency NYC, her hands shaking. Several numbers popped up. She dialed the first one, a large, well-known shelter. The automated message informed her their emergency response team was currently unavailable, suggesting calling animal control during business hours or taking the animal to a 24-hour emergency vet clinic herself. Animal control wasn't an option now. It was late evening. An emergency vet. Could she even move him? Would they take him? What about the cost? Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She took a deep breath, one step at a time. She called the nearest 24-hour veterinary emergency hospital listed. She explained the situation haltingly, describing the dog's condition. The receptionist was sympathetic, but clear. They could see him, but Sarah would be responsible for the costs, unless a rescue organization agreed to take financial responsibility. The potential expense was terrifying. Sarah lived paycheck to paycheck, but looking at the dog, whose breathing seemed even shallower now, she knew she couldn't let money be the reason he died in this alley. "Okay," she said, her voice firmer now. "Okay, I'll bring him in. How do I move him?" The receptionist offered basic advice. Try to slide something soft underneath him. Support his head and body. Move slowly. Sarah looked around frantically. There was a flattened cardboard box nearby, filthy but potentially usable as a makeshift stretcher. She carefully cleared debris away from the dog, speaking softly all the while. "It's okay, boy. I'm going to help you. We're going to get you warm and safe." Gently, painstakingly, she managed to slide the wet cardboard under his limp body. He let out a faint groan, the only sound he'd made, cutting Sarah to the quick. He felt terrifyingly light. Getting him out of the alley and to her car parked a block away was an ordeal. He was heavier than he looked, an awkward, inert weight. The cardboard sagged, rain slicked the pavement. Sarah struggled, half carrying, half dragging the makeshift stretcher, praying she wasn't hurting him more. People hurried past on the main street, eyes averted, pointedly ignoring the strange, distressing sight of a woman struggling with a dying dog on a piece of cardboard. Finally, sweating and heart-pounding, she reached her car. She carefully maneuvered him onto the back seat, covering him with the emergency blanket she kept in her trunk, which felt woefully inadequate against the deep chill emanating from him. The drive to the emergency vet felt like an eternity. Sarah kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the rise and fall of his flank, terrified it would stop. She talked to him constantly, nonsensically, just needing to fill the silence, to let him know he wasn't alone anymore. "Hang on, buddy. Just hang on. We're almost there. You're going to be okay." She wasn't sure if she believed it, but she needed to say it. At the veterinary hospital, the triage team whisked him away immediately upon seeing his condition. Sarah was left in the waiting room, trembling, covered in alley grime and wet dog smell, filling out paperwork, her mind racing. The estimated costs for stabilization alone were astronomical, far beyond her means. But as she sat there, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a deep sense of dread and worry, she also felt a strange sense of resolve. She had started this. She couldn't turn back now. This dog who minutes ago was dying on the streets, anonymous and alone, now had a connection, however fragile, to her. She felt responsible. Dr. Evans emerged, after what felt like hours. Her expression was serious. "Well, you found him just in time," she began. "He's critically ill. Severe hypothermia, profound dehydration, starvation, nearing organ failure levels. He's anemic, has infected wounds, likely pneumonia from exposure. ... The list goes on. We've started warming him, getting IV fluids into him, antibiotics, pain control. But honestly, Sarah, his chances are extremely poor. He's fighting, but his body is incredibly depleted." She then gently broached the subject of cost and prognosis, outlining the intensive, expensive care required, and the very real possibility he might not survive despite their best efforts. Sarah listened, tears welling. She explained her financial situation, her voice cracking. I don't have that kind of money, but I can't just ... let him die. Isn't there anything? A rescue?" Dr. Evans nodded sympathetically. "We work with several rescue groups. Given his condition, Hope Springs Eternal Rescue might be his best bet. They specialize in these critical medical cases. We can contact them, send them his assessment. If they agree to take him under their umbrella, they'll assume financial responsibility, but they rely entirely on donations. It's not guaranteed." While the clinic contacted Hope Springs, Sarah sat vigil. She was allowed to see him briefly in the ICU kennel, hooked up to wires and drips, lying on heated pads. He looked impossibly small and frail, yet somehow infinitesimally better than he had in the alley. His breathing seemed slightly less labored. Sarah spoke softly through the kennel door, her voice thick with emotion. "You gotta fight, okay? People are trying to help now. You're not alone." She didn't know if he heard or understood, but she felt an overwhelming urge to be his advocate, his voice. Hope Springs Eternal agreed to take him on, recognizing the urgency and severity. They named him Lazarus, Laz for short, hoping he too would rise again. This lifted the immediate financial burden from Sarah, but her involvement didn't end there. She felt inextricably linked to this dog she'd pulled from the brink. She visited him daily at the clinic during the critical first week, becoming a familiar, comforting presence amidst the poking and prodding of medical care. She started a small online fundraiser among her friends and colleagues, sharing Laz's story to help Hope Springs cover the enormous vet bills. She researched his potential needs, learning about recovery diets, wound care, rehabilitation. In saving Laz, Sarah, the ordinary person, was transforming. She was becoming his advocate, his champion, his guardian angel. Laz's recovery was agonizingly slow, punctuated by setbacks. He developed pneumonia, as feared, requiring intensive respiratory therapy. His ravaged digestive system struggled to adapt to food, requiring careful adjustments to his diet. His old leg injury flared up, requiring pain management. There were days when he seemed to regress, lying listlessly, refusing food, making the vets and Sarah fear the worst. But each time he rallied, displaying a quiet, stubborn resilience that amazed everyone. That spark Sarah had seen, the refusal to completely give up, even while dying on the streets, was still burning. Slowly, miraculously, he began to heal physically. He gained weight, ounce by precious ounce. His infections cleared. His coat, after being shaved down to treat his skin, began to grow back, soft and healthy. He started lifting his head, taking notice of his surroundings. He learned the routine of the clinic, then later, the quiet foster home Hope Springs placed him in once he was stable enough. And most importantly, he learned to associate Sarah with safety, comfort, and kindness. Her daily visits were the highlight of his slow progress. He began to recognize her footsteps, offering a weak but definite tail thump as she approached. He started taking treats gently from her hand. He allowed her to sit with him, eventually resting his head on her knee, emitting soft sighs of contentment. The haunted, vacant look in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a soft, trusting gaze directed solely at her. He was learning, after unimaginable trauma and abandonment, to trust again, specifically trusting her, the ordinary person who hadn't looked away, the one who had become his constant, his anchor, his guardian angel. Months passed. Laz's physical transformation was remarkable. He was still lean, carrying the faint scars of his past, but he was healthy, active within the limits of his old injury, his coat thick and glossy. But the emotional transformation was even more profound. He was no longer the terrified, shut-down creature Sarah had found. He was affectionate, playful in quiet ways, deeply bonded to Sarah, who continued to visit him regularly at his foster home and remained actively involved in decisions about his future. The question of adoption arose. Laz would need a specific home, quiet, patient, understanding of his past trauma and physical limitations. Several potential adopters met him, but the bond wasn't quite right. Then, the obvious solution emerged. Sarah, whose life had been completely changed by this unexpected rescue, who had discovered a passion and strength she never knew she possessed, realized she couldn't imagine her life without Laz, nor his without her. After careful consideration and long discussions with Hope Springs, ensuring she could meet his ongoing needs, Sarah officially adopted Laz. Bringing Laz home to her small apartment, the place she'd been heading towards that fateful evening, felt like closing a circle. He settled in remarkably quickly, claiming a spot on her sofa, following her from room to room, his amber eyes constantly seeking her out, full of adoration and trust. Life wasn't always easy. Laz still had anxieties, startled at loud noises, remained wary of strangers, but he knew, unequivocally, that he was finally safe. He was loved. Looking at Laz now, curled peacefully at her feet, it's hard for Sarah to reconcile him with the image of the dog she found dying on the streets. Her single act of compassion, the choice made by an ordinary person to step outside her comfort zone and intervene, had not only saved his life, but had profoundly altered hers. She was no longer just Sarah from the office. She was Laz's rescuer, his advocate, his forever family. She had become his guardian angel, and in return, he had brought unexpected meaning and immense love into her ordinary life, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary connections arise from the most harrowing circumstances, sparked by a simple refusal to look away.